and welcome to another day of vlog. So today I am bringing you the video that we all kind of love to watch but we all kind of hate to make, and that is my top 10 disappointments of 2023. So I should say this is only up to books that I read up to November. I am pre-filming, so I haven't included anything that I've read in December because I am filming this at the end of November. Sorry, I'm being joined by Bella. She's being a bit of a pain and is kind of in the way, so you will probably see this little tail a few times. So let's get started with the books that most disappointed me. So what I am going to just kind of, I guess, caveat this with, these aren't the lowest rated books that I read this year. These are the books that disappointed me. So these are the books that I was expecting really good things from and they didn't deliver. So some of these books are actually, I think the highest rating in here is 3.5 stars. But again, they were books that I was expecting sort of 5-star perfection from. So let's get into it and go through my top 10 disappointments of 2023. So at number 10, and I'm going with the ones that kind of had the highest rated, and number 1 will be the one with the lowest rating. So number 10 was a book that everybody had said would be 5 stars. Everybody would say it said this is going to hit you in the feels. I was expecting so much from this book. I was literally hunting for this book for about 6 months. Every time I went into a bookstore, I would look for it. It was never in stock. I was so hyped to read this book. It ended up getting a 3.5. It got a 6.79 on Corepile. Now, a 3.5 out of 5 isn't a bad score. That's a decent book. But it did really disappoint me because I thought it was going to be 5-star. And that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Like I said, it wasn't that it was a bad book. It just wasn't a book for me. I just didn't connect to it like everybody else seemed to. So for me, this was a disappointment. At number 9, I have a book that was the third in a trilogy. And this one was a massive disappointment for me because I had loved the first 2 books in the trilogy. I wasn't really sure where I was expecting the plot to go, but I was expecting book 3 out of 3 to wrap up the story and have a conclusion. Whether or not it was the conclusion that I wanted, I was expecting some form of conclusion and sort of some sort of satisfying ending. And this book just didn't give that to me. It kind of just fizzled out. It made me think of, those relationships where you end up being like, yeah, I mean, we're together now because it's just comfortable, but I don't find you attractive anymore and we're barely even friends. And that's how I felt with this book. It just fizzled. It just kind of went nowhere. So this one got a 6.57 on Corepile, which again, 3.5 stars. I'll be honest, most of that star rating was due to the fact that I really enjoyed the characters that we'd been following for 2 books already. So yeah, that one was The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. Just such a disappointing end to a trilogy that was so good. This one just really kind of flopped. Next, number 8. This is the book that probably hurts the most. So this is a sequel. I read book 1 this year. The sequel came out. I was incredibly excited about it. I read it fairly quickly after release. I think I read it a week after it was released. And it just kind of happened. It kind of just went along and it was fine. And it just didn't hit the heights of book 1. I had a lot of issues with this book while reading it. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like the directions the characters went. I thought the plotting was bad. I thought the story was fantastic, but the way that the story was told just didn't quite work for me. I felt like this book needed a load more editing. I originally rated this book 4 stars. However, I then kind of, after like sitting on it for a week or so, I thought about it more and I have downgraded it. I put it back through core pile again and I gave it a 6.29, which is just a 3.5 stars, but it is one that I would, on something like Goodreads, I'd be rating this 3 stars. And that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This was a 5-star prediction. This disappointed me so much. Fourth Wing is one of my favourite books of the year. And Iron Flame just really did not live up to how good I was expecting it to be. So this one, again, was a sequel. And for this one, I feel like this one was a me problem more than a book problem. So I read book 1 in, I think, 2020. And I didn't reread it before I picked up the sequel now in 2023. Hello, my darling. And I think that was the problem, because there was so much kind of slow build up at the start of this book that I just was like, come on, where are we? Let's get going. And the plot never seemed to really start. It's quite a big book. It's well over 500 pages, and it felt like for the first 300 pages nothing really happened, which, to be fair, is the same critique I had with Iron Flame. So I was just a bit bored throughout, and then because I was a bit bored, I was getting a little bit slumpy with it, and then I was just being a bit too nitpicky. So I gave this book 5.71 on Core Pile, which is a 3-star. I do want to continue with this series, but next time I am going to reread book 1 and book 2 before I move on to book 3 when it comes out. But that disappointment was Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I really enjoyed Ninth House, and I should have reread it, to be honest, because this one just kind of made me just not that excited. So disappointing. Book number 6. So this one, again, I was expecting really, really good things from this book. I'd heard fantastic things about the story. I was expecting to absolutely love it. I knew that there were a few critiques with this story, but I thought they would be things that I would look past. I couldn't. So for me, this story, as I read it, I was like, first of all, there were issues with like the plot and the setting that I was like, I need more information. I do not understand what is going on. And then there were certain liberties, I would say, that were taken that I just was like, I can't get on board with this. And again, this wasn't a bad book. I rated it 5.29 on Core Pile, so it was a 3-star, which for this type of book, which is like a contemporary romance, is a very solid, decent rating in my opinion. But for me, I was expecting this to be a lot higher. And that book is Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McCriston. It just didn't hit like I thought it was going to hit. Okay, number 5 in the most disappointing books of 2023. This book, so many people have made this book their entire personality. It has got such a huge fan base. There is, and I'm not going to tell you the person because that will give away what the book is, even though I'm going to tell you what the book is in like 3 seconds. But there is a YouTuber that I really, really love who has literally created a second channel based on this book. So I was really excited to read this. I just thought the story was stupid. I just thought that the characters were dumb. The plot was so slapstick that I was just rolling my eyes. And it just kind of made me cringe a bit, to be honest. Like I was reading this like, no, just, ugh, no, gross. So unfortunately, that disappointing book was One Piece by Ichiro Oda. It just wasn't for me. Okay, so we're getting into the end now. Book number 4 of Disappointing Books of 2023. So this one here is one that it was pitched as, so this one, I think, to be honest, this one was partly marketing fault and partly just it wasn't really what I was wanting to read at the time. So this was marketed as a romance, and it was sort of almost marketed as kind of like as a romantasy, but as a romance with a touch of fantasy rather than a fantasy with some romance. And for me, that was the problem. I went into this thinking it was going to be a strong romance, or at least a strong fantasy romance. It was in my opinion, ended up being a mediocre fantasy with a bit of romance on the side. And the bit of romance on the side, honestly, was a kind of, I don't like you. Well, I don't like you either. Little kiss. That was all the romance. And I was like, well, that's not a romance, is it? Like, it felt to me like a retelling of Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. And again, I really enjoy Shadow and Bone. That's not saying that that's a bad book, but it is not a fantasy romance, and it's definitely not an adult fantasy romance. And that was my problem. I just felt like there was not enough tension, there was not enough actual romance plot lines, and I'm not saying that there has to be smut to make a romance romantic, but there needs to be some actual romantic scenes rather than just mutual dislike and then I think the main characters kissed. I honestly am not sure. If they did, they never went any further than that. And again, fine, we don't need to be having sex on the first date, but then don't pitch it as a romance, because that is my main issue, to be honest. It was pitched as a romance with some fantasy elements. It's just a YA fantasy, in my opinion, not an adult romance. Anyway, that one, I gave this book 4.93 on Corpile. It was a 3-star, and that was A Curse of Saints by Kate Dramis. It just, and again, I do feel like the problem with this one is it was marketed wrong. If this is marketed as a YA fantasy, I would have quite enjoyed it as a YA fantasy. It was marketed as a romance with a touch of, as an adult romance with a touch of fantasy. I did not enjoy it for that, because that just didn't do it for me. Into the top 3. So number 3, I feel like this is a little bit of an unfair one, and I was debating whether or not to include it because I didn't have the highest of expectations for this book when I went into it. This is a series of 3 novellas, and I was expecting, so I wasn't ever expecting these to be like 5-star reads. I was expecting them to be decent, but I didn't have the highest hopes, because again, novellas, especially they're romance novellas, so they are quite hard to do well. You know, a romance novella, it's hard to get that full like romantic story in less than 200 pages. So yeah, I was debating whether or not to include this one or not, but I decided I would because of who the author is. I was expecting it to be slightly higher than, like slightly better than it was. So I ended up rating this book 4.71, which gave it a 3-star. And I think really, I really enjoyed one of the stories. I quite enjoyed one of the stories, and I didn't enjoy one of the stories, which kind of like lowered the average. But that is Loath to Love You by Ali Hazelwood. Now, the last 2 books I don't physically own because I have unhauled them. So I'm going to have to squish over and I will show you images up here of them. But in at number 2, this book, it was a romance, and it's a historical romance, and it honestly, I had many, many issues. I did not enjoy the writing style. I didn't really like the characters, and I didn't really like there's a weird fantasy magic element in it, which I didn't feel worked. But the thing that I really disliked and found very, I'm going to use the word offensive, but the thing that I really did not enjoy about this book is, so we have like, again, it's a romance. So we've got our male love interest, we've got our female love interest. Our female love interest is, I would say, autistic coded. She's definitely got some form of neurodivergence. And one thing that she says multiple times is that she doesn't understand kind of like, I guess, human interaction. She has no understanding of sex. For example, the male love interest, it was up on like, I don't know, probation or something, basically was like told off by their superiors, they work together, because he was found in the bed of a princess. And again, our female love interest was like, well, he must have just been a little bit tired. Never for once kind of considering that actually they were having sex and that's what happened. So we have this information that she is incredibly naive and incredibly innocent. These two love interests, they are basically put on like they're spies as well, because there's a lot going on in this book. They're spies and they're put on like a mission where they have to pretend to be husband and wife. So they are in the same room. Of course, there's only one bed. And they end up sharing the bed, and the male guy says something about like how he can show her what husband and wife will do. And she says, yes, okay. And they then proceed to have sex. And for me, the issue is she does not know what she is saying yes to. She's already proven multiple times that she is incredibly naive and innocent and does not understand anything about what is going to happen. And he just goes, well, we could do what husbands and wife do. Wink, wink. And she's like, okay, yeah. And then he proceeds to have sex with her. And for me, I'm just like, that's not really consent. And so that I found very, very difficult to read, because I was like, this is very borderline non-consensual in my opinion. I mean, in my opinion, it is non-consensual, but I can see that it's apparently kind of borderline and not. But yeah, for me, I that just really gave me the ick, and I finished the book, but I did not enjoy the book. So I rated this one 4.57 on Corpile, which gave it a 2.5 star, and that was The Secret Service of Tea and Treason by India Holcomb. And then finally we get to number 1, the most disappointing book that I have read this year. So this book, I was expecting really good things. I feel like so many people have read this and it's been a new favourite. It's been a 5-star. I've seen discussions about, is this adult or is this YA? I've seen so many people be completely obsessed with this book. So I was very excited to read it. In my opinion, the adult YA discussion can be put straight to bed. It's a very young YA. Who the hell thinks this book is adult? Because it's really not. It's a fantasy, and it had all of my least favourite fantasy tropes. So we had I'm not like other girls. We had I am the best at everything ever with no training. We had multiple love interests. We had a love triangle. And it just, all of the really irritating tropes that were super popular in 2012 YA fantasy, and in 2023, well actually 2022 YA fantasy, no longer required. I also didn't think the plot was very good. I thought this book was 200 pages too long. My battery's flashing, so I'm going to get through this really quickly. But this book, so disappointing. I gave it a 4.43 on Corpile, which was a 2.5 star, and that was Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. I have since unhauled and sold that book because I had the really pretty Fairyly edition. Anyway, before my battery dies, that is my top 10 most disappointing books of 2023. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Please don't get too much into a fight in the comments, because I will be quite scared and upset. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a like if you liked it, subscribe down below, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!